Welcome to the Graveyard Shift. This is episode, or should we call it shift number 7. So the purpose of this podcast is to provide you with some ideas and inspiration about how to improve your funeral home's operations and to help you connect your business with more families. And as usual, this podcast is brought to you by our friends with Passari. My name is Todd Carlson. I'm the Chief Sales Officer for Directors Investment Group and our family of companies, which includes Passari and Funeral Directors Life. And again, I'm shocked that our cast continues to return. I'm not sure why, but they do. But I'm grateful for that because this podcast would suck if it were just me talking to myself.
It's a picture you have of us that you hold over our head.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so that whatever it takes, Jimmy, whatever it takes to keep you coming back. Just want to. So we have our guest Matt Bailey from Bailey Family Funeral Homes in Connecticut. We also have Gary Freitag with us, Spring Grove in Cincinnati, Ohio, and then Jimmy Lucas here in Fort Worth, Texas. So welcome again to our panel. Our guests, a reminder, we love your feedback along the way here. And you are invited to share your thoughts, your feedback, and in the rare case we make sense, your compliments to us here. Send them over, email them over to thegraveyardshift@passari.com. That's thegraveyardshift@passari.com. And again, if you have complaints, we've invited our guest Martha Thayer on the line here to handle our complaints this week. So
she's actually really good at that.
I was just going to say, that's actually, I have a skill set for that. So
yeah, I saw on your website, Martha, that you have a number of course options, and I'm guessing working with Jimmy's firms, you had to create the course on how to handle complaints.
There you go.
My God.
Yes.
Oh my God, you don't even know
How to handle Jimmy. That's the course.
Good luck to you.
Oh, awesome. So, I think, Martha, in our kind of our premise for this show is just a recognition. It's really hard right now to be a funeral director. And it's probably as hard as it's ever been, and it's not getting any easier. So we are really hoping today's content will help our listeners and our viewers be more effective in whatever role they have in their funeral home and their cemetery. So thank you, Martha, for joining us. And we're excited to talk with you about our topic, a little bit about funeral home training. So Martha, why don't we start off with share a little bit about yourself and your business.
Sure. I started my career in funeral service in 1988. I answered an ad for a part-time evening receptionist in the Denver Post. So my career has lasted longer than the newspaper. They are no longer in existence.
What's a newspaper?
So I'm proud of that. Right, what's a newspaper? I went to Dallas Institute and graduated in 1991, and in 1994, I helped start the Mortuary Science program at Arapahoe Community College. I was there for 26 years as the program chair and full-time faculty member, and I retired from higher education in 2020 with emeritus status. And since then, I have been training funeral homes, training the employees, the people there, and I saw a disconnect between I shouldn't even say disconnect, I should say a gap is probably a better word, a gap between what students were learning in the funeral home, and what they learned in mortuary school. And it was bothering me because as a professor for 26 years, what I could never teach was a funeral home's culture. And that was the gap. What you learn in mortuary school, what you need to do your job. And so I started mortuary training, and I have been super duper busy ever since.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Martha, again, thanks for joining us. So, you talk a little bit, you shared a little bit about the gap in the culture of the funeral home. So maybe expand on that a little bit. But based upon your visits with funeral home owners and funeral directors and funeral service professionals across the country, what's your opinion about the current state of affairs when it comes to funeral home training?
I think everyone's in a mad dash to try to keep up.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot going on right now in funeral service. There's a lot of change. I think in terms of regulation and a lot of deregulation going on in many states, a lot of separating of licenses. And when I started the program at Arapahoe in 1994, there were just a handful of states that you could get a license as a funeral director without going to mortuary school. There are now over 25 that you can get a license without going to mortuary school. And I'm not saying that as if it's necessarily a bad thing. I'm not making a judgment on it. But what that has created is, how are we training those people so that they know what to do at this funeral home? How are we training to our mission, our culture, our values, when we have people that haven't taken a death and dying class, when they haven't taken a funeral directing and counseling class at the college level? What does that look like? What does it look like in Colorado, where we have licensing back in Colorado for the first time since 1982, but we have 5 licenses that someone can get.
Wow.
5. And 2 of them, some states have a cremationist license, but that person doesn't need to go to mortuary school. They need to have training to do that job. We also have a license for a natural organic reductionist. That person doesn't need to go to mortuary school. That person also needs training. So we're feeling this big shift in people coming in and knowing what they know, but there's just a bigger gap. And the good news in that is that funeral homes are so much better now at being able to share their mission, vision, values. That part is exciting. I would say in 1988, I couldn't tell you many funeral homes, at least in the Denver metro area, what their mission, vision, and values were. So that part of it is good. But we also have to say, how are we training to that? Every piece of training that I create, whoever I create it for, whichever funeral home, the very first part of the presentation is a review of our mission, our vision, and our values, so that as we progress through the training, we know why we're there and we know why this fits. This is why we're doing this, and this is what's going to help us do this better.
Thanks for that insight. And it sounds like one of the bigger gaps you're seeing is the struggle to have funeral homes really have a clear mission and vision and value statement. And I would agree with that. When one of the first things that when we visit with funeral home owners, we ask them about their mission, their vision, their values, and we get a lot of blank looks, because funeral homes haven't invested in that. But I want to expand that question out to the panel to say, so maybe Matt, if you do a lot of celebrant training, so if you wouldn't mind sharing with us what you think some of the biggest gaps are in funeral home training, or potentially where are the biggest needs that you see in the training at the local funeral home level?
I mean, the stuff that I hear people asking for and talking about most is arranger training. I mean, I think that there seems to be a real hunger for that. I've had people reach out to me and say, who does it? Who would you recommend? We have a lot of people that do. What a coincidence. We have people that come to celebrant training because they think it's going to make their funeral directors better arrangers. I mean, that's part of why they do it. So they look at skill sets that people may get talking about the value of ceremony, helping to articulate to families what the grief journey looks like and what the needs of families are at times like that. So I think that's the big thing. And I think the reality and the challenge is the nature of a lot of funeral homes in this country that are smaller, independent firms, maybe geographically far from other places, where you have a very small staff that can't afford to just leave their funeral home on a regular basis and go and embrace, the opportunity for in-person events like conventions and things like that. So trying to find resources. I mean, we've seen, I think, in recent years, a growing number of folks that are providing online continuing education on a regular basis, and it sounds like there are hundreds and maybe sometimes even thousands of people that are logging on for those, which I think goes to show a hunger that a lot of those folks have to find training opportunities for themselves or continuing education opportunities for themselves.
Can I comment on that?
Absolutely, Martha.
So there's also a nuanced difference between continuing education and training. A lot of what I do is not continuing education eligible because I'm helping the funeral home build what they do specifically at that funeral home. And in my mind, that's the difference between training and continuing education. Continuing education, you can go in and you can give it to the masses. Training is something that is specific for your funeral home based upon how you do it there. And that is one of the gaps that we have in continuing education in this field in funeral service is we have a lot of continuing education opportunities, but we don't have very many training opportunities because training opportunities takes more effort. It's easier to send people to continuing education. You have to make a time and a financial investment to actually do training within your funeral home so it's pertinent to what you do.
Great. So, Gary, share a little bit about your view of training at Spring Grove.
Well, it's number one, we try to encourage people getting outside the firm as often as possible, just to get different perspectives and also to create networking or people you can call and say, hey, I've got this issue. Have you ever seen this before? What do you think? We do have a standardized training program. We happen to use Greystone. We've used other companies as well. But I think it's important. The one thing I don't think this profession appreciates as much as it should, because I'm not a lifer here. I didn't join Spring Grove till I was in my mid 40s. And this profession shares more information, more key information than any profession I'm aware of other than maybe healthcare. Because once you're outside, let's say 15 miles, it's really about travel distance, but rule of thumb, 10 to 15 miles, you don't compete. It's the most local. The only industry that's as local as we are is the cement business, because there's only so far you can drive a cement truck, right?
And the Amish.
Yeah, there you go. But my point here is that once you get outside that radius, you have very, very bright people that are willing to share whatever it is you want to learn more about. I was unbelievably impressed coming into the profession. Years 3 through 5, I spent an awful lot of time in airplanes just going to see people's operations, to see how they were approaching it, what they were doing, what kinds of products and services they were innovating. And it's a really unique opportunity that's specific to this profession that I don't think we appreciate it enough, and B, we don't do enough of it. I know the other two gentlemen and I are all in a group that meets twice a year, but for about a decade, I was in 4 different CEO groups, 3 of which met annually, one I met biannually. And I'm telling you, that was absolutely invaluable when COVID hit. Because what are we going to do about our mask policy? What are you doing about quarantine? All of the questions, all of that dirt that was in the mud that was in the water, where it's really hard to figure out what the right answer was. I had 40 CEOs I could call up and say, "What are you doing about it?" And that really it allowed me to pretend I'm smart. I just stealing their ideas meant I could appear like I knew what I was doing, even though I really didn't know. So that's the primary focus for us in terms of that of trying to broaden your perspectives.
Yeah,
and
thanks,
allows
Gary.
collaboration.
Yeah.
It does. And Jimmy, I'd like to maybe ask you, I know you struggle with vulnerability, so we're going to ask you to,
Thank you,
be
Todd,
vulnerable here.
for your sensitivity.
Yeah, it's a very, and Jimmy, what has been the biggest, or what are some of the payoffs for working with someone like Martha and having that dedicated training that you offer your people? What's been the impact to your business?
I'm so biased. I remember I called Barbara Chemist. I was really focusing on I need to do some individual training. And like Martha said, training versus your CEU stuff, it's a big difference. And I love NFDA, CFA, Kane, they all provide great content. But when you want to narrow down who you are, what you want to be when you grow up, your funeral home. And so I confided in Barbara, and she said Martha. And then she said, I think that John Horan knows her. And I didn't remember this, but Martha and I met a long time ago before that. And so I called Martha and said, here's what I'm trying to do. And I was very vulnerable because I'm like, how do I ask for help like this? Right. I'm like, and was that 2 years ago, Martha?
Yes.
3 years ago?
Felt like 4, but yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it feels like for her it does. For her it feels like a life sentence. And I was like, Martha, here's what I need. Here's what I need. And she was like, well, why don't we visit and then let's see if you even need that training. I mean, so she came in and she did, like she said, we talked about our mission, who we want to be when we grow up, and what I've quickly realized is that this isn't a one-time thing. So Martha is actually, she is budgeted for us. We call it full time, but she's 20 hours a week. Correct me if I'm wrong, Martha. But we put together these segments. So we have leadership training. We have training for all staff, depending on if it's our part-time, our care team. And we've just built out our 2025 a couple of months ago. And I'm sitting here looking at it. It's like we have our leadership academies. We have 4 of those. We have care team training. Martha has, and it's just Martha. You should talk about a little bit the folks you have working with you. We do micro trainings. We're also using iSpring, which is a platform that we can put out stuff like onboarding, like our employee handbook, and people have access to that. And once they've read it and they click on it, we have, we got that they've read that. And if they have questions, they can talk to us about it. FTC trainings on this iSpring platform. But the purposeful and meaningful meat and potatoes, we do in-person training with Martha, and she caters to what our funeral homes are, our folks, our needs, and she shifts that content toward us. And then we are able to, we measure the success of our arrangers based on customer service. We have some KPIs, and then we're able to measure that. And then Martha, we allow all of our coworkers to reach out to Martha directly. They don't have to come through me. If they want to talk privately or confidentially with Martha about how they can get some professional development, don't have to come through me. Go to Martha. Martha keeps track of it, and she helps people along the way. Some people don't self-select. Some people I ask Martha to reach out to, and they know that too. And so my deal is if you are always wanting to grow and you're always wanting to do better to help these families that are calling us, you're in the right place here at Lucas Funeral Homes. And if that's not who you are, then we're probably not the best fit for you. And so it's a safe space to provide someone full-time, a Martha Thayer, who's available. And not only to provide good information, she's been there, done that. I mean, funeral director, embalmer,
I still embalm.
Still embalms. So she's able to relate to funeral professionals. It's not one of those people that you go out and you go to a training and it's someone talking that has just not been there, done that, or hasn't done it in 30 years. And so I appreciate Martha. Martha is a colleague, a friend, and there is nothing in our future that won't have her part of our team, so we can continue to grow, to get better, to support the communities. So
awesome.
I feel like I just attended my living funeral.
Some of that, Martha. Some of the
Exactly.
She's being a smart ass, isn't she?
Yeah, she said she just attended her own living funeral. So, yeah.
No, but I would say if you want to touch on some of the stuff you're doing for us, you're welcome to. I know you're working with a lot of different funeral homes, and that's not for me to talk about. But I know Matt, you have an awesome person on your staff that also works with Martha. So there's a lot of people that
We had to set up a rule that if I walk in the office and see a Lucas Funeral Home logo on a computer, the person gets terminated immediately.
I want to thank Matthew Bailey for helping pay for my training.
So I want to turn this. I think I think that the value of the training is undeniable, and of great staff training. And I like, Martha, where you talk about you starting with principles, right? My belief is you can't train for every situation, so you really have to then fall back on principles when you don't have the playbook always created for every situation. But having said that, if you look at your experience, Martha, and we can go beyond Jimmy's funeral home too, but in your conversation with funeral homeowners, because Jimmy will laugh when I ask the question, maybe. But so, what are the biggest mistakes that you see funeral homeowners making with their training programs? Right there. So
you don't have to go any farther than me. By the way, we make
target-rich environment.
Yep.
First of all, not having one. If they don't have one, that in and of itself is a problem. I don't care if you're a 2-person funeral home or a 200-person funeral home, to have an expectation that people know what they're supposed to do without being told is unkind. I have a phrase that I taught Jimmy that I love, that I learned from Brene Brown, that clear is kind.
Yep.
Yes.
And everything that I do in training is this clear, because clear is kind. And I never want to bring in confusion. I want everything to be clear.
Yeah. No, that's really good, because the clearest kind, that's a Brene Brown, and then the kind of the other side of that coin is a gentleman named Donald Miller. He wrote a book called Building a Story Brand. He said, when you confuse, you lose. So that's the other side of that coin, right? So the impact to not having a funeral home training program, how does that impact the rank and file funeral director in a funeral home when there is not clarity? What's the impact?
Well, I was thinking about this in terms of I have known people who have worked in the corporate funeral home world for 20 plus years, and then they try to go work for the family-owned funeral home. And there's a disconnect there because they were part of another culture, and they aren't able to shift and become part of this new culture. And I've also seen it the opposite direction, where someone's been at a family-owned funeral home, has gone to corporate and said that didn't work out for me. Well, what is that about? That's about culture and about people feeling like they belong and that they are part of that organization. And when people feel part of an organization, they will stay in that organization. And a lot of training, I believe, really training leads to employee retention, because people are happy, they are valued. I will not take on an account where someone wants me to just train the funeral directors. Like, no, that's not what this is about. This is about including everyone. And I see a lot of funeral homes make the mistake of focusing on the funeral directors. They are the front-facing people. They are the people that collect the money, and then not paying near as much attention, or any at all, to the people who are receiving the loved one into our care. That's why we're here. That's why I still love to embalm. That's why we're here, is because of that person who died, and remembering that there is a person who has died, who has been a part of this. So the funeral homes who are able to see this big picture, I think, get the biggest benefit from all of it. Because if you're just cherry picking who you're training, then that's going to create division, whether it be consciously or subconsciously. Well, my role isn't important enough at the funeral home for them to think that I need to receive any training.
Martha, I'm curious, what's the process look like? So you have a funeral home that decides they're ready to start, they want to implement a training program for their staff, and they call you up. And I know you said you have that first kind of conversation about identity, but what are the steps that it takes to create, implement? How does it look?
Sure. So when someone calls me, typically they call me and they already have their problem identified and they have their solution, and they are calling me and they're going, okay, she's our solution. She's going to come in. She's going to do this. Well, with Jimmy, and he's already smiling because he knows what I'm going to say, he told me that he wanted shopper call training, undecided family training, and that was his first priority. And my very first question to him was, how do you know that's a problem? How have you decided that that's what needs to be done? And I don't even remember what your answer was, Jimmy, except that you didn't know. You were like, it's more of a perception.
I say that a lot, Martha.
It was more of a perception. So when I talk to funeral homes about what it is that they need, the first thing that I try to do is help them determine that is what the need is, because it might be something completely different. I have a list of questions that I email out to the funeral home. I have them answer those questions about their training needs. I sit with it. We schedule a follow-up. We talk about what the training needs are, what needs to be in person, online, a micro training. Do you want to bring me in during, like Jimmy has dead talks every other Thursday at his funeral home? Is this like a 2-minute micro training dead talk type of a thing? And we just start outlining what it is that's needed. I also will not take on a client until I physically go to their facilities and meet their people and talk to them and have some one-on-ones with the people who are in leadership. I want to hear what it is that they think that they need, and make sure that there's not a disconnect between what the funeral home owner is coming to me and saying is needed and what everybody else is saying is needed. Because the last thing that we want to do is create a training program where there's no buy-in, or where we have not gained agreement. I use the gaining agreement model all the time. I don't even know who taught it to me, but it's a gaining agreement model. And I'm like, I do not move forward unless I know that we are all in agreement about what needs to happen here. And then I just start meeting with people. And if they have materials that they can give me, I can create curriculum content, which I've done quite a bit for Cana. And then we just start rolling it out. And then whether or not the funeral home wants me to do the tracking, that's part of my contract with Jimmy, is I track all of that for him. And some funeral homes I have where all I do is I create their content and I give it back to them. They disseminate it. They keep track of it. They make sure that it's sticking.
Great. That's a great, your last word, make sure it's sticking. That was actually my next question, Martha. So great minds, at least yours, thinks alike. Your great mind is thinking. So, that's one of the things I think is how to make these, the training and the idea of permanence in the training and real changed behavior, real changed mindset, change skill sets, all of those things when it comes to training. What's, in your experience, Martha, the best way to make training stick?
It has to be consistent, and we have to know how we want it to stick as part of the training. That in and itself is in the training. When people leave, they need to know what their takeaway is. They need to know what it is that they're going to do with it. They need to know how this is going to be tracked. Are we giving people information? If I'm giving people information, like we just updated at Lucas Funeral Homes, the employee handbook. So over 100 people have taken the module with the employee handbook. Well, that's going to stick because we're going to have people look at that annually. So we're going to make sure that we keep it in front of them. That's information based. Do we have a training that's skill based? If it's skill based, go and do the skill. We're going to follow up with you about the skill that we have taught you. Is it something in the care center? Is it something with making arrangements? Some of these things can be tracked through the surveys and such that Jimmy sends out. Are you teaching a process? Are we practicing that process? all of that needs to be clear in the training, how we are going to make it stick. And one thing that I appreciate that Lucas Funeral Home does is every time I do an in-person training, Matt Morian, who is his operations manager, Matt sends out a survey a couple of days later. We ask people about the training. We say, was this helpful? Is this something that you're going to be able to implement? Have you done this already? What do you need to carry out what it is that we've already talked about? And so that makes a difference as well, because we're keeping it in front of people's faces.
Well, definitely. Well, thank you. Those are really helpful tips. It's kind of like one of those things where, you have to keep the things in front of people. And if you don't incorporate it into your daily conversations, then they view training as a one-time event instead of, permanent change. So
Yes.
Jimmy's shaking his head there. Jimmy, what are your thoughts on that?
No. Training's, and that was me. Like, I just need you to come in and fix this and be gone. That was it. Right? It makes sense to everybody. Everybody that's hearing this, just fix
You
my
don't need to
problem.
get a hotel. You're going to be out of here pretty quick.
Not even a rental car. The Uber will wait outside. And so it was good for me, right? Because what I quickly realized is it's not going to stick unless it's just part of your culture and it becomes part of your everyday. And so while we have these trainings, for 2025, what we realized is like we probably need to go back and make sure we're hitting the 2024 stuff, because it just needs to continually be a part and top of mind of what we're doing, because it's who we are.
Yeah.
So what you said resonated with me, Todd. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jimmy. All right, hey Gary, I got a question for you. The funeral futurist that you are, the guy that comes from other professions and into the funeral service profession. You came for a 3-hour tour and you end up here, years later, 18 years later,
Only Gilligan.
Yes, exactly. Well, I didn't want to point out the resemblance, but
Look, a skipper. Go ahead.
I don't even have to bust your balls, Gary. Todd's doing it for me.
Yeah. So, but Gary, I'm actually really interested in hearing your opinion on this, despite the other guys' feedback here. But when it comes to the future of funeral home training, kind of where are you seeing the big needs? Anticipating what's coming around the corner. Where are you seeing the big needs?
Well, in the funeral profession, I'm going to answer my own question first, and then I'll answer yours, because I have one slight idea I want to share with the listeners, and that is we're a combo. And so we intentionally invest in training our people about the operations in areas they don't participate in. So we use things like ICCFA University, and we'll have our funeral directors or funeral director managers go take the cemetery management college just to gain some empathy, just to gain some understanding of what their frustrations are, because it makes them a better team player when they come back home. Now, in the future, I really think the single biggest, and we talked a little bit about this earlier on an earlier podcast, is managing complexity. You go from a world that is 85% Mass of Christian burial, like 1965 or something like that, and you go to today's world, we're at 2/3 cremation. Those consumers, those families, are expecting customized service, secular services, as opposed to the Mass of Christian burial, which is it's very structured, and I'm not criticizing it. There are people that get a lot of value out of that tradition and that repetition. But a lot of cremation customers these days say, well, Dad played amateur baseball and he was a fisherman and he was a huge fan of the Chicago Bears. And you're trying to bring elements of that in. Every time you add more variables to a funeral service, you add the chances something's going to go horribly wrong. And so managing complexity and then reinforcing with your frontline staff that there are going to be errors. There are things that are going to go wrong. It's okay. It's part of the playbook now, because we have to experiment. We have to stretch. And funeral directors, good funeral directors, tend to be control freaks, because that's what makes them good at their jobs. And so when you say, hey, we want you to add more variables and we want you to go out and really stretch, it's like walking them up to a cliff. And you have to make sure you give them the positive reinforcement. It's okay if something goes wrong. We need to do this. This is what the family's expecting. And don't worry, I'll have your back if the dove release doesn't work, or the the magician doesn't show up, whatever the variable is, right? The petting zoo doesn't show up, right? In the last podcast. So I think that we're focused on trying to provide, in addition to training, systems that are more flexible, so that they manage more of the complexity associated with delivering a funeral. So the funeral director feels like they're more in control, they're more on top of everything. So I really think that is the number one challenge facing traditional funeral service going into the next 20 years.
Yes, well, great. Very insightful, Gary. So, hey, Matt, what are your thoughts on the future of the profession, and how that's going to force our training needs to be adapted?
Well, I mean, I think change is the only constant, right? And I think that that's going to require constant learning, because things are going to be different. Our consumer is changing. Our employees are changing. We have generational shifts that we've talked about previously in terms of what people expect and how people learn. And I think, training is going to hopefully be a key or a part of our toolbox that helps put people on the same page and the same team. And I think it's not going to be an option or a choice as time goes on. If we'll either do it and we'll be here, or we won't do it and something will change, whether it's us or somebody else will step in and do it.
I think that's real. I think that's true. Thanks, Matt, for sharing. So, Martha, you are, I'm sure, thinking about this on a daily basis about how you need to adapt your training to serve the future of funeral service. So what are your thoughts on this topic?
I asked a very similar question to my online students to this. I created the first online fully accredited mortuary science program in the country in 1999. And I asked the students one day, what do you think the biggest challenge is for funeral service in the next decade? And a student wrote this beautiful essay that started with the sentence, I think the biggest challenge facing funeral service in the next decade is going to be finding a funeral director who knows how to direct a funeral. That's exactly what I did. Wow. I went, wow. Like, how heavy of a statement. And he backed it up. He has been a funeral director for several years in the state that he was in. If I remember correctly, he was in Montana. He talked about the cremation rate being as high as it was, the struggle to continue to make that connection with families and what that looked like, how he is fearful every night before he has to direct a massive Christian burial the next day, because he hasn't directed a massive Christian burial for the last 6 months. And now he has to do it again. And so he's nervous about it. And there's people on his team who know how to do it. But I don't want to just let them be the ones that continue to do it, because then what happens when they're not here? How am I going to ever know how to do it? And how am I going to know how to do it consistently, because I'm not having the opportunity to do it? It's huge. I mean, the changes that we're seeing in funeral service right now, and keeping up with that, because the number one thing above all is connection. And It's our connection with each other. It's our connection with our allied professionals. And it's our connection with our families. And all of that connection, training is just a part of that. And that's why I love that I get to do this.
Bailey and I were having this conversation on my drive to work today about having someone that can actually work a Catholic service, just picking on the Catholics, right?
Yep.
And all we needed to know is Freitag's figured it out that he's hiring magicians.
Nothing in here, nothing in here.
But that was apropos, because literally I started smiling when you were talking, Martha, because that was Matt and I's conversation on the way in.
Well, and it's no one's fault.
No.
It's no one's fault. It's just where we're at. And so we just have to continue to figure out how to adapt to what it is that the consumer wants, because it is what the consumer wants. And the consumer is going to go down the street to the restaurant and have their memorial service without us. The consumer is going to go to the hotel and have a reception in a ballroom without us. It's figuring out what that looks like and how do we present our value of what we do to those families, and that is going to continue to change.
The emotional value of ceremony.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah, Matt, you had something to add?
No, I was just going to say that so I think sometimes we get in these mindsets of it's like an either or situation. Like we look at the Pew Research numbers and we see the religious nuns and we say that they are now the second largest group if they were a church in the country, and we really have to make sure that we are doing things that appeal to them. We do. We clearly do. That does not mean that when we're hiring a young director in their early 20s who was raised as a religious nun, that they don't have an expectation that they're able to be the funeral director at a Catholic mass. And just because they may not have been born in such a way or raised in such a way that they know the Lord's Prayer, it doesn't mean that they are not able. It is a learned skill. You can be Christian and have Muslim and Jewish members of your community and Hindu members of your community that you serve well because you learn about their traditions and you're intentional about doing it. And it's the same with that too. So while we are, trying to be better about meeting the needs of families that what we've done in the past may not speak to them, we still have to make sure that we're training our, younger folks, remembering ourselves to continue to be able to do that as well ourselves.
And our younger folks don't have the soft skills that some of the older generations have, but it's
Just
not
talk
their
about
fault
this.
because this is the generation that when they went to the park with their parents, the parents put them on the slide and went and sat on the bench and got on their phone. It's not their fault, and it's not our fault, but it is our problem. I have a phrase I always say, it's not my fault, but it is my problem.
Yeah.
But to Matt's point, it's a skill. These things can be taught, and I reject that you can't teach empathy. I reject that you can't teach soft skills. Yes, you can. They are teachable. They were taught to multiple generations, and they can be taught to people who are really willing to receive the information.
All right. Gary.
Just a real quick comment I wanted to make. I also think access to capital is going to be important. I think Batesville did a study in this. The venue's 3 times more important to a cremation customer than it is a burial customer. And the other element that I want to make sure that I make is we are hamstrung as an industry in some areas because the regulatory environment is sending people to places like Marriott and the Country Club because, for instance, in Matt's area, you can't serve food. I think that is 1940s thinking, and we need to start amping up the heat on the regulatory bodies that some of these restrictions are just silly, and they are literally pushing our customers to other venues like the ones we've talked about today: country clubs, meeting venues, the hotels of the world, who are already good at event planning. Right? They're better than we are at the moment. So we both need to have the venue and the ability to execute that if you're going to compete with the Marriotts and the country clubs of the world.
Yeah, that is a great insight, Gary. Well, hey, unfortunately, we're out of time. And I just want to say this, Martha, thank you so much for your insight today and your leadership in this area of training.
Thank
And
you.
also helping funeral directors to remember that their business always starts with that vision, that mission, and their values. And that's where every great training program ought to start. So thanks for that great reminder of that today. And to our listeners, I just want to thank you for your investment in time here to listen to us and to maybe hopefully you've learned something that you can apply in your business. that you've taken away something that you can do differently today. And that's always my hope. Now, with with your criticisms of the program, just email Martha. She'll take care of it. She's trained.
Hey, I was going to say, Martha's super approachable. Mortuarytraining.com. If you have a question and you're not doing a training thing, she'll tell you if she's a fit or not for you. I would encourage it. Sorry, I just plugged her. She's going to give me 20 bucks.
Thank you. I appreciate that,
No,
Jimmy.
but we do want your feedback. We love to get your ideas for future podcasts. For any feedback that you have on the show today, we really appreciate that. Send those to thegraveyardshift@passari.com, and that's thegraveyardshift@passari.com. So thank you, Martha. Thank you to our panel once again. Great discussion, and you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.